Jump! Go!
Welcome to CoxPod, a podcast for coxswains. I'm Sally.
I'm Breana.
I'm Anne, and we're three coxswains with a combined 50 years of experience in the seat. We decided to share our knowledge with coxswains everywhere via this podcast, and ultimately, we hope to create a community among our audience where coxswains can learn from each other. We recognize and appreciate the other coxing voices and opinions and experiences in our growing community. We're excited that Sally and Breana were able to sit down with another experienced coxswain. And here's that interview.
On today's episode, we have our very first guest here on the podcast, and we are with Kayleigh Durm, which is a name that you may recognize from the coxing world. She is the author of the spectacular blog Ready All Row, which you can read at readyallrow.org. So welcome, Kayleigh. We are psyched to have you here, and we know our audience is going to love hearing from you. So as a way of kind of starting off, could you tell everyone a little bit about kind of how you got started on your own coxing journey?
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this. So I have been coxing for 17 years now. I started when I was a freshman in high school. I'm from Marietta, Ohio, which is in southeast Ohio on the Ohio and Muskingum rivers. And I grew up always seeing Marietta College's boats out on the river and, not really knowing what they were or what it was that they were doing. But I remember always thinking it was cool. And when I was in middle school, I had a teacher who I knew through another extracurricular that I was in. I was in the marching band. And my teacher, his son was on the rowing team. And he used to tell me every time he would see me in the hallway that I needed to be a coxswain. Every single day he would say this to me. And for about 6 months, I had no idea what that was, what it meant. And eventually I got online and I looked it up and I read about, this sport and this position. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect for me. And I had played sports, all my life up until that point. I played softball for 10 years. I had played basketball a little bit and I loved playing sports, but I never thought that there was something as, cerebral as coxing. I would ever find something like that. So I remember going home and telling my parents that, when I got to high school next year, I was going to be a coxswain. And they were like, okay, honey, you do that. And they also, I think just didn't really know what it was. And then I told them about it and they were like, yeah, that's perfect for you. We got to get you in this. So when I got to high school the following year, practice started, as soon as we got back from Christmas break in January. And, we started winter training and then we always got on the water around the week of Valentine's Day. And from then on, here we are, 17 years later. So it's been quite a ride looking back on it. But I think that, I got into it in a very, kind of funny, unique way. And I'm excited about where it's taken me over the years.
Kayleigh, what was the surprise thing that you love most about coxing? The power trip, obviously, but what keeps you coming back that you didn't anticipate?
Just how much thought and strategy goes into it. I think a lot of people talk about, coxing as you're like the quarterback of the team. And I think that that's a very apt description, but I also think it's very boring. I do see the similarities between, quarterbacks and coxswains, but the thing I always kind of think about it is like playing chess. If you're thinking about a chessboard and the different strategies that you have to take to get from one side of the board to the other, that's kind of how I look at coxing. You've got so many moves in your pocket and you've got to know when to break them out and when to play it safe and when to be a little risky. And I think that describes coxing perfectly. And that sort of mental athleticism is I think the thing that's kept me in it all this time.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, I was a little worried when you were talking about being in bands because Breana and Anne are all about the band stuff. So at least chess I'm all about, but
Yes, there's a growing community out there, perhaps, of people who migrated from marching band. And if you're listening and that's you, tell us.
Yeah, pretty much the whole time that I was in high school, there was a lot of overlap between the band kids and the rowing kids. And I really appreciate that because I loved being in band. I played the clarinet for 7 years and loved it. And I do remember thinking in middle school, like, oh, I wonder if that like band geek stereotype is like a real thing. And then I got to high school and it's just like, half to three quarters of the band, is in rowing, or I think we had at least one or two football players on the team my freshman year, basketball players, soccer players, cross country runners. And I think having that overlap between those two things and having my interests collide like that and my friends groups come together, I think just kind of made the whole experience of both activities that much better.
Yeah, for me, it was my high school did not have rowing, although it now does have a small rowing team because I started seeing them at regattas when I was then coaching on the high school scene. So I'm very excited for them. So for me, it was like a total transplant to a totally new activity when I went from high school to college. And like many coxswains, as I've already shared on the podcast, I had the experience of just having to figure it out by myself in terms of, how to do this sport. And one of the things that was my just absolute lifesaver during that time was your blog, Kayleigh. And of course, I had no idea who you were at the time, but I was just like, here's this one person just absolutely writing the best information. And the only place on the internet that has anything like this is Ready All Row. And we kind of found that in our college coxing community. And I just like consumed absolutely everything that I could find on there because it really was. And I would argue, still is the preeminent blog about coxing information. And that really resonated with me and is the same thing that we're trying to do in audio form here is kind of really convey that comprehensive information. So we have a shared mission for sure. And it was so amazing to through as we do in the rowing world, rowing networking connections to actually get the chance to meet you. So I'd love to hear more about what inspired you to start writing Ready All Row.
Yeah. I mean, it still surprises me, 8 years later when people are like, oh, I love your blog. I read your blog. I, started reading your blog in high school and now I'm in college. Like, I never thought that it would turn into something like that. And so it's definitely like a humbling point of pride for me that people, find so much value in it. I started it back in October of 2012. I had graduated from college and I took a break from coxing while I was in college. I think doing it for 4 years in high school and then jumping right into it in college, like I got burned out pretty fast and realized that if I wanted to stay in the sport long term, then I needed to walk away from it for a while. And so I took a break while I was in college. And then after I graduated, I moved to Boston. And, if there's any place to get involved with rowing in the United States, it's obviously going to be in Boston. And so I, got involved at CRI and I coached and coxed there a little bit. And I think I just started posting, on social media about, being back on the water and, how much I missed it and was excited to get back into it. And kids that rode at CRI and in the area, I think found my posts and, would DM me questions. And so I would just answer them, like you're having a conversation with just any normal person. And after 3-4 months of that, basically that whole summer, I was like, I should aggregate all of this information into one spot because just having it scattered throughout like my social media maybe isn't the best way to do this. And it seems like there's a need for there to be, a comprehensive set of how-to instructions on how to be a coxswain. And I remember thinking when I was in high school, in 2006 or 2002 to 2006, why doesn't this exist? How do I become a coxswain? And I figured, if it's not already online, like why not just do it myself? And I was kind of at a point in my life where I think most millennials post recession were trying to figure out what to do with their lives. And we were all underemployed and kind of were trying to find things to keep us going every day. And rowing ended up being that thing for me again. And so I just got on WordPress and copied over everything that I had on my social media into, actual blog form. And it became not just like a passion project with a purpose, but also like a creative outlet that I didn't realize that I had been missing. And when I started to, I didn't really promote it anywhere. I was like, this is weird. People are going to think this is like, self-serving or bragging or whatever. And so I didn't really like share it that I was doing this. And I that was one of the things I think I've always been most proud of, is that for as big as the blog got, it was wholly done through word of mouth of other people. And people started emailing me and asking questions. And the majority of the time, the bulk of the content that I was posting was original questions that, coxswains of all ages were sending me. And it never surprised me how thoughtful the questions are, because I think most people that are coxswains are very well-spoken, type A, cerebral people. But what always caught my attention was they were questions that were being asked that I was just like, why are you asking me this? Like, you don't know me. Like, you know what I've done based off of like what you've seen on, Instagram or Facebook or stuff like that. But like, don't you have a coach that can answer these questions for you? And it hit me about 6 months into the blog, like writing the blog and answering all these questions and stuff, how lucky I was, with my team growing up, that I had coaches who cared about their coxswains. And my coach had been a coxswain himself, and he taught me everything I know, basically. And I feel like there was a lot of things that I taught myself, but it all came from seeds that he had planted. And it shocked me that there were not other teams that had, coaches like that so many coaches were rowers who had never been coxswains and just didn't care about learning how to coach this vital part or vital member of their team. And so having those conversations with kids and just hearing the questions that they had and the gaps in knowledge that they had was what kind of pushed me to start creating more like original content, I guess, and expanding off of the questions that I was being emailed, and just start writing actual, like, this is how you do this. This is how you do that. And, just finding as many resources as I could online and just putting them all in one spot, so that, they didn't have to do what I did and look online and try to come up with piecemeal answer for how to stake boat, or how to call this drill or that drill or whatever else. So it started out from very, very humble beginnings and just kind of grew as more people started learning about it. And I think felt like I was relatable enough that they could ask me, their quote, quote, stupid questions, and I would not treat them like they were stupid questions. And that's also one of the things that I think I've always been really proud of, is that I'm very upfront with people, and it's just like, yeah, your question might be silly, and sometimes there is the occasional stupid question, but that doesn't mean it doesn't deserve an answer. Like, you might be a very basic question that, yeah, you probably should have figured out how to stake boat before you got to college, but you still need to learn how to do it. So like, let's talk about that right now. And the fact that, people felt comfortable enough to ask me those questions, I think spoke to just the tone of voice that I tried to put into the blog, and just my personality in general that I tried to put into, the things that I wrote and the responses that I gave to people. And I think it's not only information. I think that coxswains need to know that there are people in their corner too. Like rowers, not to blame rowing for all of, the problems that coxswains have, but it's very apparent that there are a lot more rowers than there are coxswains. And so I don't think that there have ever been a situation where a rower has wondered, oh, does this person understand, the experience that I'm going through? And I don't think there's ever been a time where a coxswain hasn't asked that question of themselves. Does anyone understand why I'm so frustrated right now, or why I can't figure out how to do this thing? And just being there and being like a person that is saying, no matter what, like, I'm in your corner because I'm a coxswain too, and I've been in your shoes, and I might not have experienced the same thing that you have, but I can empathize with it. I can fully see where you're coming from, and at the very least, we have a common ground in that regard. And so let's go from there. And I think being able to, not even being able, but being willing to have conversations with people and just let them know that no matter what, they can talk to me and ask me questions, and or even just email me to vent. My inbox is open for that. And I was always pleasantly surprised when I would get an email from someone and they'd be like, you don't have to respond to this, I just need to complain to someone who gets it. I remember the first time that happened, and laughing and thinking, oh, all of this is so valid, I totally relate to all of this. And then thinking that was going to be a one-time thing and no one was ever going to do it again. And then I would say, of all the emails that I got, probably like a quarter of them were just people saying, I just need someone to vent to because nobody on my team gets it.
Your collegiate attitude is really remarkable. One of the things Breana and Anne and I kind of discovered in each other is that we've learned to cox in kind of a vacuum. We didn't have anybody to talk to, nobody understood, so we found solace in each other. Did you experience a similar vacuum?
I think to an extent, every coxswain kind of learns in a vacuum. I think that, and I think a little bit of that is self-afflicted too. Like we don't like asking for help. We want to figure things out on our own. And like I am guilty of that to this day. I have a very hard time asking for help and admitting when I need help. And I think that a lot of coxswains find themselves in that situation too, because there is this expectation that you should be able to take the initiative and find the answers on your own. And so I think that coxswains kind of are put in a vacuum, and I think to some extent they keep themselves in that vacuum. So when I was in high school, like I said, my coach, one of my coaches was a coxswain, and he would always talk to us after practice, whether it was for 10 minutes or an hour. He would stick around for as long as we had stuff to talk about. And sometimes it would be one-on-one, sometimes it would be as a group. But there was always this, quote unquote, open door policy with him. And I think that kind of helped the coxswains that were on our team recognize that if we wanted to be better and get faster, then we just had to work together and have conversations. And there was definitely that era of, competition between all of us. But I think that there was never really a time where we were at each other's throats and solely looking out for ourselves. And that, I think, definitely helped set the tone for me that coxing, the learning process of how to be a coxswain, you should take your education upon yourself, but also make sure that you're working to make it a collaborative process with the other coxswains on your team.
This dynamic that you're describing is so rare. Like, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, including the part of having a coach that would talk to you, about specific things. Like, I don't think people in the rowing community reflect enough on the fact that you would never not teach a rower. Like, you would never just say like, oh, well, they'll figure out what the catch is, I don't need to say that. Or you would never, in a race scenario, you're going to spend weeks beforehand practicing your starts. And so they go there and they know exactly what to do. But people will, in that same exact scenario, leave their coxswain and not give them any information about like how do you get to the start? What does it look like in the row up there? What does the warm-up area look like? What's a stake boat look like? How do you get into one? And maybe at best they just say like, I don't know, Google it. There's a thing. It's like a platform, and then you just back it, make sure your stern's in there, and a person grabs it like that. Maybe that's like all the more information people are getting. So it's so critical to have resources out there for the people who aren't lucky enough to have a coxswain community, whether fostered by their coach or just, all of the coxswains that are on their team. If they have co-coxswains on their team, some people out there are flying solo. So
yeah, when I would get emails from coxswains, they would always identify themselves as, I am this coxswain and I cox for this team. And whenever they would complain about their coaches, I would go look their teams up and look up their coaches. And for 5-6 years, I had this like mental list of all these coaches that I would see in the news, like in Row 2K articles or in US Rowing or anywhere else, of just being lauded as such great coaches. And not to take away from that, because I do think that they accomplished a lot, but at the same time, behind the scenes, you're leaving an entire group of people behind simply because you've never been a coxswain. And that is just so offensive to me. Like I never understood how a coach could put so much effort into working with 8 people and then just leave one of them completely on their own on an island, and then expect them to be able to run the show, I guess, for lack of a better word, when they're not around. Like if you're not giving them the tools, then how do you expect them to do all of these things? And I sometimes I would have that conversation with friends that were coaches, and they would just be like, oh, well, like I just don't know what to do. And it's just like, okay, so go learn, take the initiative, like talk to coxswains. Like you're asking these kids to teach themselves. So you're the adult here. Why aren't you taking the initiative to teach yourself how to coach coxswains, and then actually working with them? And so that's always been a thing that's bothered me, even since before I started the blog. That's always been something that got on my nerves. But even more so now, I think that I'm older and I am in the coaching ranks a lot more than I was when I started the blog. Like I just don't see any excuse for it. And one of the things that I always like kind of chuckled at was I would occasionally get an email from a coach, either high school or college, and they would say, I heard my coxswains talking about your blog, and so I went and looked it up, and I learned so much. Thank you for being a resource for coaches and coxswains. And I was just like, oh, yes. Like my thing was always like, this is a creative outlet for me. Like I want this to work for coxswains and be a good thing for coxswains. But at the end of the day, like this is my thing. And if it helps just one coxswain, I'm happy. But as I got further into it, I was like, you know what? If a coach finds this and actually like reads what I've written and reads the verbatim genuine questions that 14, 15, 16-year-olds are asking, and they take a step back and do something or take some steps to alter their approach to working with their coxswains based off of everything on my blog, that I think right there is kind of the ultimate measure of success for me. Coxswains can only do so much, and we can only I agree that we should have high expectations of any individual that wants to be a coxswain, because it is a very high stress position. But at the same time, like they're teenagers. The majority of them are teenagers. The expectations can only be so high. And so the adults in the room have to be doing the work as well if you want to see any market improvement, I guess, in how coxswains feel about their worth on the team going forward.
When you are coaching a coxswain for the first time, what are some of the things that your go-to things that you're stressing, that you're trying to instill in them, core values? Like step 1, miss the bridge abutment, but after that.
Yeah, I mean, when I start working with coxswains, like talking about like skills like that, like raw skills like that, like in the boat kind of stuff, is so far down my priority list. Like it's like number 15 or 20. Like, I think that coxing there's a lot of like interpersonal skills and like internal skills that you kind of have to get down first before those technical skills come. So I try to talk a lot about the intangible stuff, like your attitude and, you know, how you're speaking and how you're communicating, and why saying something this way is more effective than saying it that way. And like talking about that kind of stuff, I think lays a better foundation for building into those technical skills than trying to start with the technical skills and working backwards, which I think is the more common approach. And I don't think it's wrong necessarily to do it that way. It's just, I personally have had better success starting with the person and trying to mold them into a coxswain by improving kind of like those interpersonal skills, like I said, than starting with like the more technical aspects. I just don't think that that's the most effective way to do it.
I've had coaches explain to me that coxswains either are or they aren't. They just appear, they're not developed. They come like fully formed, like Athena out of Zeus's head. How would you address that?
For a long time, I think I was definitely the same way. I definitely felt like coxswains were born and not made, because I think that there are inherent personality traits that just make you a good coxswain. And I for sure know that I don't have all of them, but I know that I've got enough of them that I felt pretty confident right from the start. Whereas I saw friends who were not as confident as I was, and it took them a little bit longer to get there. They did get there eventually, but it definitely required a little more work in certain areas than it did for other people where those traits came a little more naturally. It wasn't really until I started coaching at summer camps and working with kids more like on an even more individual one-on-one basis that I realized that you can make a coxswain, but in order for you to do that, you have to actually invest the time into that person. And if you're not willing to invest the time into that person and helping them overcome whatever hurdles they run into, then it's not going to happen. And so there are definitely coxswains, I think, that are born, and you can help enhance those skills as time goes on. But, you know, you can make a coxswain too if you're willing to have conversations with them and more importantly, listen to them. I think that's the biggest thing that coxswains want, is they just want to be heard. And the struggles that they're facing and the problems that they're having, they just want someone to listen to them. And even if they don't understand it, as long as someone hears what they're saying and can empathize with that particular hurdle, then maybe they can find some common ground and figure out how to get over it. But if you're not willing to take the time to listen to them, then they're never going to grow. You are actively stunting their growth as a coxswain. And that is going to be such a hit to their self-esteem that they're not going to want to grow anymore. And I've seen that happen so many times, and it kind of like crushes my soul a little bit every time I'd have that conversation with a coxswain. And I would tell them, you know, maybe coxing isn't for you, and that is okay. But that's a decision that you have to make for yourself. Don't let someone else make that decision for you just because they're not willing to invest the time into helping you figure out what your potential is.
As a coxswain, one of the dangerous things is you don't always know what you don't know.
Exactly.
There were many times in my life I wish I knew now what I didn't know then, kind of. But how, as a developing coxswain, would you offer advice to help someone treading the waters from where they're going, that they really like this, they can sort of dock 33% of the time if the wind is right, they're the second string? How would you recommend they advance?
I think that the biggest thing that they have to do is lean into their curiosity. Like, every coxswain is going to come off the water, or they should be coming off the water every day with a question that, they didn't know how to do something, or they think they could have done something better, et cetera, et cetera. The list is endless. But I think that in order for a coxswain to get better, they have to be curious, and they have to not be afraid to ask questions. And I say that as someone who, like I said earlier, I don't like asking for help. I feel like it's been ingrained in me since I was a little kid that, I'm a very independent person and I like to discover things on my own. And both of those things are very true, but sometimes you can't always find the answer on your own. And in those situations where you can't, you have to do a little research on your own. And that's not limited to just going to your coach. There are other coxswains on your team. Maybe they've been in a similar situation and they have an answer for you. And that's where the collaborative part of taking your education in your own hands comes into play. You have to develop that relationship with the other coxswains on your team so that when you come to them, they see you as a teammate that can help them get better by them asking this question, rather than the competition who's trying to steal all your secrets and steal your seat. So I think developing those relationships with the coxswains on your team and asking questions of each other is one thing. The other thing is, we're kind of at like the height of social media right now. You can find coxswains on Instagram from other teams and reach out to them and say, hey, I cox at this team and I have a question, and just ask them, slide into those DMs and see what they say. Get creative. That's what I've been telling people for the last, 8+ years is just get creative. Email me, email, other coxswains, send them messages on social media, but start with the people on your team. They are going to be your best resource because they are experiencing similar things to you every day, similar conditions on the water, similar docking, all that kind of stuff. They are going to know better than anyone else the quirks that you have to deal with, and they might have figured out something on their own that they're just waiting to share with someone else. So I think talking to the people that are closest to you is step one, and then getting creative and expanding from there is steps 2 through 5.
You touched on an interesting point about going to your teammates. Since so much what we do is unquantifiable, you do have a natural tendency to hold things back and reinforce the silo. How would you recommend coxswains, especially coxswains on the same team, be competitive but also supportive?
That is probably one of the most common questions that I would get from kids. And I think that it starts by just realizing you are on the same team. You are working towards the same goal. And if your only goal is to get into the 1V and cox the 1V, you're not a good coxswain. Like, I'm sorry. Like, your priorities are misaligned, and I can glean as much as I need to know about you as a person and you as a coxswain if that's what you say your goal is. So I think that every coxswain has to think about, why are they there as an individual? Why are you doing this? But then also realize that at the end of the day, the collective goal is to make the team fast and make the team better and leave the team in a better position than you found it when you graduate. And that happens through, particularly the last point, leaving it in a better position. That happens by having a culture where coxswains aren't afraid of each other, and part of that comes from the older kids on the team reaching out to the younger kids and saying, hey, you're new to the team. Let me show you the ropes. Let me tell you how to dock on our weird dock in the wind, or how to navigate this turn on the river in a crosswind or something like that. It starts with just putting your hand out and saying, hey, let me help you. And from there, have regular coxswain meetings. You don't have to, scour the internet and listen to every coxswain recording on YouTube. Like, just get together and have a conversation for 10 minutes before practice and say, hey, yesterday it was really windy and I really struggled with this. what about you guys? Did you guys figure out a way to handle the bridge in a tailwind like that? Whatever. It's little things like that I think make coxswains comfortable with each other, where they feel like they can go and ask questions of not just the coxswains above them, but also the coxswains that are below them, either grade-wise, age-wise, boat-wise, whatever. And from there, you don't have to spill all of your secrets. If you figure out, like, this is how my boat does something the best, by all means, like, keep it to yourself. Keep something in your pocket to break out when the time comes. But don't be catty about it. Don't be immature and act like you're above everyone else. Like, that kind of attitude, I think, is what fosters the idea that coxswains, can't work together and that they're only out for themselves. And that kind of stuff is noticeable to your rowers. And more oftentimes than not, rowers want a coxswain who is collaborative and can work with the other coxswains more than they want one who is only singularly focused on themselves. So I think working together and just talking and having a conversation and treating each other like people, and more importantly, like teammates, is how you create an environment where coxswains can feel like they're getting better while also still maintaining that air of competition when that needs to come out. And subtly, you are kind of competing every single day in more ways than I think coxswains realize. That, a good coach is paying attention to a lot of things that coxswains, and rowers, they don't realize. But the only time where you kind of really need to break out your competitive streak is when you're doing pieces or you're actually seat racing or stuff like that. The rest of the time, you should be working together, because if you're not working together, the likelihood that you're going to have a smooth practice and that you individually are going to get what you need out of that practice and it's going to be effective for you, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're making such good points here, because like the culture generates some of these negative phenomena, I guess we could say. Like, there's the impression that coxswains should instantly know everything and always be a source of a complete authority. And so you should know the workout and you should never ask a question and you need to know things at all times and you should fake it if you don't, and all kinds of crazy advice that sometimes well-meaning, varsity rowers give to younger coxswains or coaches give to coxswains. And that just leads to that fear of like, well, if I ask a question, I look like I'm not in charge. And that, it spirals. And so I appreciate that we've kind of tried to counter that with the conversation here so far. And same thing, like, it was really resonating as you talked about interacting positively with other coxswains on your team. Like, think about that practice scenario. Let's say that you have mastered switching pairs into 7. This is something that, like, I was on a team where we had a lot of 7s in the morning some days when rowers didn't show up on a small team. And if you have figured that out, like, and you let other coxswains flail at it, then sure, the rowers will be like, wow, so impressive that she can master that and everyone else is just a hot mess. But imagine the alternative where you just share that technique with the other coxswains, and now side by side with your 2 7s that morning, you're having an excellent practice where the coach can focus on other things instead of all the rowers being like, I haven't been switched in, it's been forever since I rowed. So there's like nothing to lose, but it can be very scary, because this sense that there's a ephemeral thing that's intangible, as you said, Sally, that coxswains bring to the seat, and theirs in particular, that sense can really lead coxswains to hold back things that could really elevate the whole team if they shared. And creating that environment of sharing will, exactly as you said, Kayleigh, like, I've borrowed things from much younger coxswains who had really smart tactics that they used, and I've shamelessly incorporated those into my own racing and practicing. And so if that culture of sharing exists, again, for the people who are lucky enough to have coxswains on their team and aren't the only one, or people who want to read things online and participate in the community that way, there's so much to be gained by that sharing, for sure.
Yeah, like I told a coxswain, I forget what year it was, but I was coxing a 4 at Head of the Charles, and it was a reunion crew of 4 that had won the world championships in the 90s, and I was so excited to have the chance to cox these guys. And I was nervous about, like, my race plan, like, oh, these are world champions, like, my race plan has got to be, like, on point. And I had been talking to a middle school coxswain that week over email, and they had sent me a recording of their practice, and something that they had said just stuck out to me, like, oh, that is really good. And I took it in the boat with me and I used it, and we came off the water. We had a fantastic race. I think we finished fourth maybe, and we got off the water. And one of the first things that one of the rowers said was, that call that you made at, whatever point in the course was so good. And immediately, as soon as I had the boat put away, my Cox box and everything put away, I got on my email and I emailed this 13-year-old coxswain. I was just like, I just have to let you know that I borrowed this call from you, and the 40-plus-year-old world champion rowers that I just coxed absolutely loved it. And they emailed me back and were just so beside themselves with excitement that, something that they had done was, used in a head of the Charles race by me and these guys. And like that was just such a fun moment for me. And I think that it's also really humbling too, that like, just because you've been in the game for a while doesn't mean you know everything, and that like your calls are, that much superior to someone who hasn't been coxing for that long. So I think that humbling yourself a little bit is a big part of fostering that environment where you can be collaborative while still being competitive. I think too, one of the things that I've always told coxswains is that, if you're afraid to ask for help, that's okay. But it's something that you have to work towards getting over, because that's not as evidenced by, what I've said. It's something that I still struggle with, but it's not just something I struggle with in rowing. I struggle with it, in my day-to-day life as well. And I have told coxswains numerous times that you might think it makes you look bad to ask a question, and having that, like, framing it negatively like that in your own head is one of the things that's holding you back. But if you try to reframe it in a positive way, that, oh, asking a question shows that I'm not afraid to admit what I don't know, that I think translates much better, like in your own psyche, I guess. And having that attitude and just admitting, like, yeah, I don't know this, whatever, I'm trying to figure it out, cut me a break, like that, I think is goes so much further in helping coxswains learn and get over that hurdle of being afraid to ask other people for help. And it might encourage other people to move past it too, and ask questions too, if they see that you as a 14-year-old freshman coxswain who's only been on the team for 2 weeks isn't afraid to ask questions. Maybe that'll encourage the 18-year-old senior 1V coxswain to also, get over that as well.
Do you have any tips for a coxswain that isn't getting any coaching, and, for the couple of years that they're at their institution, there just is no hope of their coach voluntarily coming across a resource like your blog or our podcast and consuming it? Are there any ways that coxswain could still advocate for themselves with their coach? So maybe on their own, they're reading your blog and they're learning as much as they possibly can, but is there any way that they could kind of initiate a conversation and maybe help their coach them better? Managing up, as we call that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is another question I've had a lot with coxswains, both at the high school and collegiate level. Like it always excited me when I would get an email from a college coxswain and I would see like what, team they were from. And you always kind of have this, I guess, idea that it's the grass is always greener on the other side. And then I would hear from these college coxswains about how not green the grass was. So it definitely put a lot of things in perspective for me. I think this definitely ties into what I'm sure we'll talk about in a later episode about, transferable skills. But this is definitely a time where you have to sit down, take a deep breath, and initiate what is likely going to be a very hard conversation. And you first have to figure out what you want. If you feel like you're not being coached, then you have to figure out what specifically you want to be coached in. Like, what are you struggling with? You can't just go to your coach and say, you have to coach me. You have to tell me what to do, because that is so vague, and that just sounds like you're complaining instead of you are trying to enact actual change in the relationship. So you've got to sit down first and kind of map out what your goal is. So if you are, trying to eventually work your way up into the 1V or the 2V or whatever boat you're angling for, what skills are needed to be in that boat? And then you've got to sit down and assess each of your skills and where you fall. And if there's one area in particular where you are struggling, then first, like I've said before, do the work to educate yourself. Find resources on your own, read my blog, email people, whatever. Make sure you're doing the work first before you go to anyone else and expect them to do the work for you. So that's the first step. From there, the area that you feel like you need help in, or that you need more guidance in, or you want to understand their point of view more, why? What are the specifics to that? And lay it out. Actually write it down and think about each of those things. And then go to your coach and say, I want to have a conversation about my performance, my potential, where you see me going, and how we can work better together. Because there is never a situation where a coxswain is doing everything 100% right. And I know that we like to think that everything we do is right, but there's always areas for us to be improving on. And more than likely, your coach is like sitting in the launch griping about something that you're doing, and you don't even know about it because they feel like they don't have time to have that conversation with you. So this is your opportunity to ask them, how am I doing? Genuinely, I want to know what you think of my performance and what areas I could be better in. Because these are the areas that I think I'm doing well in, but I know that I'm struggling in this area. And I'm curious if you feel the same. And maybe they will, and they'll be like, oh, good, I can finally have this conversation with them. Or you'll realize that you're on different pages and you're seeing different things, and maybe that's the source of whatever friction exists between the two of you, So as you have this conversation with them, you have to stay very level-headed and just keep in mind what your end goal is. Your end goal is to improve your working relationship with them and help them understand what you need from them, while also doing what they need you to do as an athlete. And if you come to them with a specific thing that you want their help with, then that's going to garner you a lot more support than if you just, like I said, walk in and say, you need to coach me more. By showing that you've done the work and go in and say, I've listened to these recordings on Ready All Row, and each of them has a section that covers this drill that we're doing, but I'm still struggling with how to execute this drill because my boat just doesn't seem to be getting it. Can you help me? That is going to show your coach that you actually are doing the work off the water to try to figure out how to do this. And now you feel like you're kind of at the end of your rope and you're coming to them and you need help. And your coach needs to recognize the maturity in that, I guess, across the board, because that's a hard thing for people to do, especially coxswains who are type A people that don't like asking for help. From there, it's just a matter of not getting frustrated when things don't go your way, and instead thinking about, what can I do in this situation to work on whatever issue that I'm struggling with. And then whatever gap there is there between the work that you're doing to get where you need to be and where you need to be, that gap is where you go to your coach and say, I need your help. What can I do? From there, I don't think you need to do anything else, because then the onus is on your coach to figure out how they can help you. You've done the work. You've shown that you are willing to invest your time and your energy to get better, not just to improve yourself as an athlete, but also to make your boat better and make your team better. And if you can clearly show all of the ways that you have done that and are willing to do that and are willing to work with the coaching staff to make those things happen, at bare minimum, your coach should be willing to do the same thing for you. And if they're not, then I think the coach should be, but probably won't, be asking themselves why they're coaching if they're not willing to do that for 5, 6, 7 athletes on their team.
Kayleigh, as kind of like a corollary to that, you're asking, 13-year-olds who are a pile of hormones and their frontal lobe isn't fully developed. How would you give them advice to accept the criticism that it is technical and not personal?
Yeah, that's always a struggle at any age. Like, I still struggle with that. I think for younger kids, like, it's just something you just have to repeat to yourself, that like when you get on the water, you're a coxswain, and that's when the technical part of the job takes over. When you get off the water and you're away from practice, that's when you are you again, basically. And if someone says in a coxswain evaluation that your tone of voice is terrible and your calls suck and they don't want you in your boat, that's a technical critique. There is obviously a nicer way to say that, but that's a technical critique. If they say that you are a person who they don't trust, that's kind of veering into personal critique territory. And so you have to be able to separate the two and understand the difference between, when someone is critiquing you as a person, which should happen rarely, and when they're critiquing you as a coxswain, which should be the majority. For younger kids, this is one of the major areas where coxswains, I think, are kind of forced to mature a little bit better than their rower counterparts, because at 12, 13, 14 years old, whenever you start coxing, whether it's middle school or high school, that's a lot to ask of a young kid. And you have to, I think, have a level of self-security and awareness and esteem that maybe your peers don't have. And you kind of have to accelerate that development in order to be able to not be personally offended anytime someone tells you that you're not doing something right. That's a skill that, I think a lot of coxswains don't realize they have to develop in order to be not even a good coxswain, just an effective coxswain. And that's one of the things that I try to teach kids when I'm working with them, either one-on-one or at camps or over email or whatever, is that it goes back to coaching the person and building the technical skills on top of that. Because if you aren't able to separate the personal critiques from the technical critiques, then me trying to teach you how to steer is never going to be effective. Because if I tell you you're doing something wrong, you're going to interpret it personally, and then you're going to be mopey the rest of practice, and neither one of us are going to get anything out of it. So there definitely has to be a level of maturity where you kind of just like sit yourself down and say, okay, I need to understand that when someone says this to me, they're critiquing me as a coxswain. And when they say this to me, then it's personal, and I can deal with that a different day, at a different time, in a different way. It all comes back to having the self-awareness and the maturity to have that conversation with yourself and differentiate between the two things. That's one of the things when I do coxswain evals, this is probably another thing we'll get into in a later episode, but when I would do coxswain evals at MIT, like I would go through and I read every single comment that the guys made. And if I felt like something was like a personal attack, which happened every so often, it was very rare, but in the times where comments like that did come up, I would go to them and say, what is this about? And most of the time it would be like, oh, we did these right after a bad practice and I didn't mean it like that. So most of the time, like when you see something like that, maybe it's situational and it's just someone taking that opportunity to vent when they really don't mean it that way. And other times there is some legitimacy to it, and it is a sign of an underlying problem that you need to address. But being able to differentiate between all of those things and look at stuff as objectively as possible, it's a hard skill to learn, but if you want to be effective as a coxswain and also preserve your own emotional stamina, you've got to be able to master it sooner rather than later.
This is a domain where I think coaches can have a positive impact as well, because we talked in an earlier moment about the idea of, in psychology, we might call it a fixed versus a growth mindset. So if you come in with a fixed mindset, this is in the popular culture by now, I think you're the kind of person who says, well, coxswains are just born that way and you either have it or you don't have it. And therefore that means I don't have to coach because they already have it. But if you have that mindset as a coach, then you're not going to be able to provide coxswains with effective feedback because you see it as some kind of inherent personality trait that can't be learned or improved. Whereas I would say if you come at giving feedback or even interpreting rowers' feedback related to this point as a coach, you come at it with more of a growth mindset of any coxswain who's putting in the work and has the budding skills there can develop their skills with the right training and guidance, then that gives coxswains a lot more hope and a lot more useful feedback. So it feels less like personal attacks and it's more like productive comments on technical changes that they can make. I think a coach can have a big impact in that way. Like, I think a lot of coxswains might feel stuck in a situation where it feels like I have been reading the blogs and I have been calling drills better because I've looked things up on my own and I have been making better race plans, and my coach still keeps putting the same person in the 1V, and I feel like my improvement is not being seen at all, even though I'm working really hard. So I'm curious if you have advice for a coxswain who's feeling, unseen despite trying to make all of these efforts, maybe because their coach feels, they've just decided that they like this person in the 1V and they're now, their mind is closed to exploring the other coxswains. I think there are people in situations like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you ask, 100 coxswains of varying ages that same question, I'm sure 99 of them would say that they've encountered that at some point in their career. They're doing all of the work and feeling like they're making improvements, and they're still not getting any recognition or acknowledgement of their efforts. And I'm sure that this has been said by numerous other people in numerous other situations, but I think about this video that I saw of Beyonce, and she is talking about how you can do everything right and still fail. And I think that's kind of what I've always said to coxswains, is that you can do every single thing right. Do everything that you're asked, everything that you are expected to do, and still not get the outcome that you want. And it sucks. It's a gut punch. It's a hit to your self-esteem. And it can make you question your place in the sport and on your team. That's also one of the harsh lessons that I think we all have to learn at some point in our lives, whether it's in rowing or not, that sometimes stuff is not going to go your way. And you can either accept that that is the case and move on from it and just keep plugging away and doing what you're doing, or you can let it eat away at you. And if you let it eat away at you, then it is going to erode whatever love of the sport you have left, basically. If you feel like you've done everything that you can do and your coach still puts the person who shows up late to practice and never does anything in the 1V and you're stuck in the 2V, that's going to hurt. But they made their decision, and you have to be the bigger person, take a deep breath, accept that that was the decision that was made, and then go out and perform the exact same way that you've been doing. Go out and have a good practice and execute the way that you've been executing, and implement, the things that you have been implementing that have made you a better coxswain over the last few practices. Keep doing that. Because if you do the alternative and you let it burrow in your brain and start attacking your own self-worth over it, then you're going to start resenting coming to practice and being on the water and having to get up at 6:30 in the morning or stay up late at night to finish your homework because you had an afternoon practice. All of these things are going to start building up, and eventually you're going to quit because you don't know why you're doing it anymore. And I have been in both of those situations. I empathize and sympathize with both of them because I've been there. When I decided to take a break, I don't think it was a a hasty decision. I think I had my reasons for why I wanted to walk away from the sport. But part of it was because I felt like I was doing everything that I could be doing to get better. And there was just zero acknowledgement whatsoever. And that experiencing that on top of already being kind of burned out while also like adjusting to college and everything else, like I remember thinking like there are so many other things that I could be doing with my time. And I don't think that I would have felt that way if I had felt like my coaches had acknowledged the work that I was putting in. So for coxswains that feel like they're doing all the work and not getting anywhere, it's a hard position to be in. And I don't think that there is any one right answer that is going to solve that problem. It's all very situational. I mean, I've talked with enough coxswains that have been in that exact situation to realize that like there is no one answer fits all. So I think that at the end of the day, like I said, like you have to decide how you're going to let that decision affect you. If you're going to let it make you stronger and make you a better coxswain, and you're still going to show up and keep performing and executing for your teammates, or are you going to let it have a negative effect on you and make you question why you're there to begin with? And one of those things is going to make you stronger as a person, and the other is just going to make you unhappy. Like I said, I've been in both of those situations, and I have let rowing make me unhappy more times than I can count. And I have regretted falling into that trap every single time. And I can look back to numerous situations where I've had the opportunity to let rowing make me unhappy, and I veered so far in the opposite direction and said, no, not this time. I think that we're not always in the right frame of mind to make that decision so readily. And I think that that's okay. I think that there is a certain vulnerability that you have to allow yourself as a coxswain, and that is one of those times. You know, you kind of have to just be okay with not being okay sometimes, but don't let your coach's decision to not put you in the 1V after all of your hard work deteriorate whatever self-worth you have. It's not worth it. But if you can recognize all of the growth that you have achieved over, whatever period of time, then not only are you going to be able to recognize how strong you are as a coxswain, but you're also going to be able to translate that into how strong you are as an individual human being. That's the small nugget of wisdom that I have garnered over the last 17 years, all bundled up.
It's helpful because when you don't have those 17 years yet, and it's your junior year and you thought this was going to be your year and you really tried, that could be one of your first times experiencing that. So I think it will be very helpful to hear that for coxswains out there.
Anything I can do to help, I am here for.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kayleigh. We are stoked to have your insight here, and we really hope that all of our listeners appreciated hearing the voice behind the blog that you probably have read. So we'll have links in our show notes to all the ways that you can read Kayleigh's work and get in touch with her. And believe it or not, that writing a blog is not even her full-time job. So we are eager to have Kayleigh back very soon to talk about her career trajectory and how she went from her college experience through the coaching ranks and now has landed a very unique position in the sport of rowing. So if you're really excited about this sport and you're thinking about ways that you could incorporate it into your future that maybe are not the typical trajectory, we hope that you will be excited to hear about that. So again, thank you, Kayleigh. And could you tell our audience where they can find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so obviously the first place is the blog, readyorrow.org. My email for the blog is rowingandcoxing at gmail.com. And then Instagram is where I kind of live in the social media world. So you can find me on there at BeantownKMD. Yes, I used to live in Boston, can you tell? But yeah, those are all the spots you can find me online.
And this is a perfect invitation for any listeners to take the advice Kayleigh gave in this very episode and reach out to her to ask your questions and reach out to us as well. So we have social media associated with our podcast and our Slack community, which will all be linked in the show notes as well. So lots of opportunities for coxswains to participate in the conversation and strive for that continuous improvement that's going to make us all faster.
Wow, that was a great interview. And I'm sorry I missed the chance to talk with another coxswain who has had marching band experience. It's exciting to connect with someone who's been so generous with her knowledge and continues to actively support coxswain development.
Kayleigh was incredible, and I really hope you get the opportunity to talk to her again. For today's quick pick, I want to emphasize Breana and her magical technical skills and tell you about a rowing related escape room she created for all of us rowing and adrenaline junkies who are trapped at home during this COVID epidemic. We're going to send the link to the escape room in the show notes. Please feel free to do it with yourself, do it with a team. It is incredible, as is our Breana.
Well, thank you, Sally. I'm happy to share this resource with the community. It's just something free and fun that I made. I kind of discovered this through the education world and thought it might be fun to create one of these for rowing. It's all completely run via the internet, so ultimately, you can Google the answers to everything, and I hope it can serve as something fun that people might choose to do in a virtual team meeting, if you're looking for a safe way to stay connected as a team. So I hope the community gets something out of that. I'd love to hear if you had a good time with it. And as we also do on our episodes, I want to give a shout out today to Erin, a coxswain who was an early supporter of this community and one of the coxswains that I had the privilege of coaching at the high school where I coached. And Erin is actually the person responsible for connecting us to Kayleigh. So we are just so grateful. You were just able to listen to the fruit of that connection. So thank you, Erin, for helping that little piece of coxswain networking happen. And in the meantime, we invite you to engage with us on social media and on Slack. We already have some great questions in our Slack community that we are planning to incorporate in an upcoming episode. So keep those questions coming. We'd also like to thank our earliest Patreon supporters, Wendy, Alan, and Liz. And already up on the Patreon, you can find things like behind the scenes looks at our graphic design and some fun statistics on where our audience is listening from. It's a very global audience already, and we're super excited about that. And you'll also find on the Patreon page an extended cut of a few parts of this conversation with Kayleigh that didn't make it into this episode. And all of that is on the Patreon page for as little as $1 a month. So we really wanted that to be something accessible in case you'd like some extra content from us. And we are just so excited to bring you more content soon. So until next time, I'm Breana.
I'm Sally.
And I'm Anne, signing off for now.